Welcome to The Difference Engine, the show for tech founders, investors, and innovators.
Welcome to The Difference Engine and a series of interviews of European technology leaders brought to you in association with Boardwave. The Boardwave network is a powerful community of founders, CEOs, chairs, independent non-execs, and their investors from across Europe, representing companies at every stage of development.
Boardwave provides easy access to relevant skills, knowledge, experience, mentorship, guidance, and advice in the belief that together, this powerful group can help each other build stronger businesses and shape the long-term future of the sector.
This week, we're joined by Boardwave patron and mentor, Rich Waterworth.
From 2019 to 2024, he was General Manager for TikTok in Europe and EMEA, responsible for growth and management of the business in the region. Prior to TikTok, Rich led marketing for YouTube and EMEA for nearly a decade, helping to establish the concept of creators during a period of hypergrowth.
Before Google, Rich launched on-demand service, ITV Player, and connected TV platform, YouView. He is currently enrolled at his alma mater, Oxford University, researching the use of AI in the creative industries, and he serves as a trustee of the Teenage Cancer Trust. Rich Waterworth, welcome to The Difference Engine.
Can you talk us through your early years at Branded and IPC Media and how you moved into the world of electronic media as you went to Cello Media?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, as you say, came out of uni just as the dot-com boom was getting going. And I was very lucky to work in this company you mentioned called Branded. It was a marketing branding consultancy. And the reason I thought I was really lucky is because I saw, tons of different businesses over, the 4 or 5 years I was there. And it was an incredible time because it was a dot-com boom, as you said. So there were some amazing businesses. We were working with, Excite and Yahoo, the sort of, pre Google search engines who were really doing brilliant things. And then there were some crazy businesses. There were businesses who'd raised, quite large amounts of money on the back of really, they would call it a business plan, but it's basically just an idea, like zero product, zero testing, zero kind of proof of concept. So it was a strange time, but it was a really, really great time to learn about these different kinds of businesses. As I say, some of them very dot-com oriented. We also worked with a lot of media companies, more traditional media companies. So learned a lot. And after doing that for a few years, as I said, I went to IPC Media, and I did that because having been a consultant and spent a lot of time with all these different businesses, I wanted to work inside a business. I wanted to actually understand how a business was run day to day. Have an opportunity to be responsible for a business or parts of a business and see how that was run and how to grow it. And so I went to IPC Media, which is a magazine business, is now Time. And that was an amazing experience because that was an incredibly well run business. They'd been publishing magazines very successfully for 60 odd years. It was pre the sort of massive disruption to that business. So I had an opportunity to get in and see how, just a well-oiled machine worked. That was a very well-run machine. They knew exactly what they were doing and were very successful financially at that point. So it was a contrast to some of the other businesses I'd worked with. So that was the kind of early years. And as you said, after that, I went into, television really. So digital multi-channel TV, but essentially it was in TV, Cello Media, and then ITV as the next stage.
You went to Cello Media, but by 2007, you'd moved to a big brand people would recognize, ITV, where you were Director of Platform Marketing, which I presume was quite a revolutionary title in those days. What did that tell you about the way broadcasters were having to adapt to the online world?
Yeah, it was kind of a revolutionary title. I was the first person. I was in the marketing department. I was the first person in the marketing department who was hired with a kind of, interactive multi-platform remit and job title. And the company was just starting to really invest in interactive online services, but it was from a very it was from a very sort of basic level, I guess. The ITV.com website when I got there was text and pictures, and so I think everybody recognised that for a broadcaster, this probably wasn't really quite right. So it was a really brilliant time of saying, okay, well, if that's not right, what do we need to build online? What do we need to build on mobile? How do we start to create digital experiences around the incredible content franchises that ITV has? And I think, one of the big learnings for me, and probably, for a lot of people at that point, was the direction we should go in was really clear. It was really clear that we had these huge brands, massive audience on linear TV, which could be, cross-promoted to digital experiences. Incredible. And so it was very clear what we wanted to do in terms of creating, two-screen experiences and moving these audiences around. The actual execution of that is not easy. Because, the culture and capabilities of product development in terms of digital experiences is very different to the culture and capabilities of program making. And so you had two cultures that are quite distinct, didn't necessarily understand each other that well, trying to work together. And in some cases there were successes, but it showed that the actual execution was pretty hard.
So do you think the cataclysmic category changes going on were fully appreciated by both sides, only one, or were they both slightly wrong? Because where we get to with you down the line with where you end up is in the new category that was forming at this time.
It's the classic case of, I think there were some people who sort of understood how the new category was emerging and evolving. And there were some people who didn't really understand it or weren't really particularly interested in understanding the new category. I mean, the classic example for me that sticks with me is the time when Susan Boyle went massively viral after her appearance on Britain's Got Talent. It was a genuinely incredible moment. She was, all over the world, mainly on YouTube. And it was so stark. In the days after that, there was a group of people, including myself within ITV, who just were like, "This is amazing. This is fantastic. This property, Britain's Got Talent, that we'd like to sell around the world is having this incredible, moment of promotion and digital engagement around the world. Breakthrough. But there was also a significant cohort of people who were like, "This is an absolute disaster. We need to get this taken down immediately. And so you could just see that, there were sort of reasonable positions on both sides, but just very different outlooks as to like, okay, where are things going and what do we need to try and optimize for? So I think you can sort of see in that just the different cultures and the different outlooks. It's pretty stark.
Clearly, at that point, YouTube had started to loom really large in your life. And in 2010, you actually made the decision to move there. And you spent 9 years there, right until 2019. Now, those must have been the golden years at YouTube, because YouTube was establishing undoubted category leadership in online video. What was it that YouTube did right to get into that position, which it still enjoys to this day?
Yeah, I mean, they were amazing times. I mean, I think it's easy to post-rationalize, isn't it? And sort of think that the position YouTube's got into was sort of inevitable. But, when I got there, it was definitely not inevitable. YouTube was not taken seriously by large parts of the industry, the content industry, the ad industry, the agencies, the brands. It was, viewed as something that was basically watched by teenagers with lots of, fails and basically not serious content. So it was definitely a big challenge in the early years. I think there's a number of things YouTube got right. One of them is that it had, as part of Google, and the reason Google bought it is it had that kind of tech company or at least tech outlook of actually what we're building here is a platform. What we're building is a platform, and that platform needs to encompass a series of technical features, that will be useful and enjoyable to users, a series of features that are beneficial to creators and people uploading content. And so things like thinking about how YouTube is going to be embedded in other websites around the internet is a classic sort of tech company play that drives just massive distribution and growth. And then beyond that, YouTube was thinking very long term about what kind of ecosystem and infrastructure it's trying to build around the creators. So thinking from an early stage about the partner program and revenue sharing, and how do you build a sustainable economy around this platform? Which again, in those early years, 2010, 2011, 2012, even people didn't understand that, and so it really was quite a visionary thing to say we are going to build this sustainable platform where there's going to be monetization, there's going to be a way for creators and content owners to post, get massive distribution. So I think just having that vision, having a kind of holistic view of what it takes to build a platform and build an ecosystem is a really big thing that YouTube got right. And I guess having the benefit of Google with all the engineering and other assets that brings, helping you along on that vision is obviously a massive advantage, because it just gives you the ability to scale technically, to run a service globally that is actually pretty hard to do technically. So I think that's one of the really big things that maybe is underestimated.
One of the things too, I guess if you think about the history of YouTube and certainly your involvement in it, and you just drop that word in twice in the last 5 minutes, and that's the word creators. And it strikes us that, well, we know that language is really, really important in category creation. And the idea of creators, we think was really, really important to the development of YouTube. Can you talk us through that? Because a lot of your work when you joined YouTube must have been about convincing the agencies in particular, to start with, that they should take these people really seriously.
You're absolutely right. And what's interesting about that word creators and the concept and the category, but specifically the word was not really used. In fact, it was not used in the early days. They were kind of kids who were uploading. It was UGC. So we made a conscious decision across YouTube to use the word creators, and to invest in building I guess you'd call it the equity around that word, building, a sense amongst that community of people uploading that they were creators, and we were going to help them grow and build a kind of business as creators. And then you referred to the kind of agencies and the people who might be advertising on YouTube. We did a lot of work to build the understanding and the credibility really of creators with that world in the early days, because of course that was key to advertising on YouTube. We needed them to understand who creators were, why they were so significant. And so, we did various things across the business, but from a marketing point of view, one of the things we did is we applied the sort of TV marketing playbook, if you like, and we put creators on billboards, on buses. We put them on stage at big events we were holding. We really sort of treated them in a similar way that you would treat TV talent. And it was fascinating, because the first time we did that, I think people were quite confused. They're like, well, who are these people? Who is that person on the billboard? But actually what we were doing is saying, what you don't understand is that these creators have huge followings and communities on YouTube. And they are, to their audiences, to their fans, they are like TV, stars and talent. And so you should see them in a similar way. And I think gradually, as the category continued to grow and we continued to elevate YouTube creators in that way, we did just start to build that understanding. Okay, this is a new wave of media. Creators are like mini content companies, media companies in their own right. And obviously we've sort of seen that continue to evolve over the last, 10, 15 years.
Right. So the Sidemen documentary that's just come out, where they talk about their blowing up on YouTube, what people forget is, as you say, these stars are stars like they would be on TV, where you'd see the tweaked and presentable versions. But also, what's interesting is the backstory. They're real people doing real stuff. The behind the scenes piece, which you encourage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're real people. They're independent creators. They want to be independent creators, and they wanted to be independent so that they could do their own thing. They could serve an audience, often a very specific audience in a certain niche, and just do it in that way. And it's really interesting to me. I think, over the last 10, 15 years, there have been various sort of attempts to bring creators into television in different forms. Generally hasn't worked that well, with some exceptions. But now you're seeing, with the Sidemen, with Mr. Beast on Prime, you're seeing kind of creators bringing what they do to TV, if you like, to streaming TV. And they really are bringing it as independent, creators. They are their own, production companies in doing those kinds of things. And so essentially, you're seeing the development and maturation of that content onto a different platform. But it's taken quite a long time.
And from the other end of things, clearly the roles of creators are really important, but didn't YouTube also get a little bit of an advantage in sort of 2015, 2016, when the big brands suffered what I think people call the safety crisis, and that resulted in a real opportunity for YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, it was a challenge, for YouTube at the same time, but one of the kind of consequences of that period was that YouTube continued to evolve the way the partner program worked, and so more mainstream, more brand safe creators were basically able to monetize even more effectively within YouTube. And so for a certain kind of group or cohort of mainstream brand safe creators, science and education content, these kind of things, that was a massive kind of boon, and gave them, and did in a lot of cases enable them to move to a different level in terms of their kind of monetization potential. So that was one of the kind of steps in this journey. There've been interesting moments when YouTube launched the subscriptions product as well around that time, 2016, I think it was, which again just created another revenue stream for creators and content companies on YouTube. So it's been a sort of series of step changes over time.
So I suppose we have to think that by the end of that decade, Google and Facebook, Google being YouTube's parent, had sort of collectively won the conventional video market, and we're starting to expand into this new form of presenting content, which we think of as short form video, with things like YouTube stories, but also Facebook Reels, and of course Instagram that Facebook had acquired. So talk us through how the idea of doing stuff in short form started to develop and become a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually the new entrance into the market, so that I think really stimulated the short form view. So probably, one of the earliest sort of mainstream or bigger platforms to do it was Snapchat. They started doing shorter form, vertical video. Obviously, ironically, YouTube's history, originally legacy, the origin of YouTube was pretty short form video. It gradually sort of got longer over time. So short form, was definitely part of the DNA and history of YouTube as well. But I think moving to vertical video, short form, and scrolling feeds, that was the combination of those things that was a new form factor, a new experience. And as I say, I think Snapchat did some of that early on, but then it was really some of the new players, including, TikTok obviously was the one that really, really broke through, that just started to establish that as a different consumption experience, and a different, something that required a different way of creating as well.
You were clearly paying attention at that point, because in 2019 you made the decision to join what was then still a very embryonic TikTok. Quite a big decision to leave the still evolving category leader, YouTube, with the might of Google right behind it. So what was it that you had noticed in terms of the potential opportunity developing, while you were at YouTube that convinced you to make that leap? And were there other factors, for instance, something about the company itself that made you believe it was the right decision?
I mean, you use the phrase, paying attention, and I think that it did get my attention in autumn 2018. So it just been launched as TikTok at that point, and the first time it got my attention was because the biggest YouTube creator in the world at that point was a guy called PewDiePie, who I'm sure people remember. He spent about 2 weeks in autumn 2018 posting every day on his YouTube channel compilations of TikTok content. He just became obsessed with it, and he's a big deal. So that drove a lot of interest in the YouTube kind of community, creators, and viewers of his content. So that's when I first became aware of it, and I think it was, the thing that got me really interested was a few different factors. One, just seeing this new form factor, this new combination of UI and UX, the full screen audio on, vertical video, scrolling feed. It just was clearly creating a different consumption and by extension a different creation experience that was different to what we've seen. So I was kind of really interested in that. The other thing that really got me interested was from a very early stage, the users and creators that were succeeding on TikTok, that were starting to get lots of views, very clearly identified themselves as TikTokers. This was not really YouTubers who were like, oh, this is a new platform, let's go. And this was a different cohort of creators and users. They identified, with TikTokers. They liked it, the community, the aesthetic. And I knew from YouTube that if you have that kind of community loyalty and energy in a group of creators, that's an incredibly powerful source of creative energy. And then you mentioned the company. So I did my research and found out more about ByteDance as a company and TikTok as a company and how successful ByteDance had been and how they thought about growing and launching products and businesses. And so I just put those things together and thought, okay, I really feel strongly that this is something that has an opportunity to break through. But again, don't forget, at that point, all the conversation was the duopoly. This is like, it's kind of done. It's Google, it's Facebook. No one's really going to be able to break through. They've cornered, the market. And so it was, I quite liked the idea of that challenge of doing that, but it definitely did feel like, okay, this is going to be a big challenge.
One of the things which seems, if you look back at the history, to distinguish YouTube and TikTok was that TikTok had this massive belief that local originators were the key to growth and that they were going to grow very, very quickly.
Absolutely. It was really, really focused on, as you say, getting into, specific countries around the world, understanding the culture and the communities and the sub-communities of creators and users where TikTok could be beneficial, could be a good experience. And really, going in and stimulating and supporting those communities from the ground up. So it was actually an amazing, approach in how do you, from the ground up, just stimulate and support those communities and create a series of communities within one app. So people think of TikTok or any of these apps really as one app. Actually, what they're doing, and what I think what TikTok did probably better than anything that had come before it, was enable lots and lots of sub communities. And it did that. We did a lot on the ground to find those communities, support them, educate them, bring them together, connect them. But the product itself, the power of the algorithm is that all of us can have different experiences on TikTok. We can engage in communities and sub communities that are completely different one from the other. There's this, people talk about being on different sides of TikTok. That's what that's about. We can just get into the niches and communities, and it could be a TV show I'm watching right now, could be a hobby or I've got, or and TikTok will enable you to spend time in and around those creators and those types of content, and doing that at massive scale around the world in different languages and different cultures is obviously an incredibly complex feat.
You see in that too, the classic features of great category creation is that something which is genuinely different from that which people already know, and the building up of very quickly of very powerful ecosystems. But, that must have been a hell of a ride for 5 years. And last year you made the decision to move on. What was it that prompted you, apart from it being a hell of a ride?
Yeah, it was an incredible ride, absolutely amazing.
Should we go with exhaustion?
Yeah, maybe, at times some of that, but it was incredible. I mean, I loved it, and in a lot of ways, I would have loved to carry on, but a combination of sort of personal, professional reasons, probably as much personal as anything else. Yeah, I've been across YouTube and TikTok for nearly 15 years. It was a great span of time, but it takes up a lot of time and energy. I'd at that point I'd started doing a master's, and I was really interested in just sort of giving myself a bit of time to explore some of my own personal interests, have a bit more time in my life, and so I decided to give myself that time. Also have more time, with my family. And honestly, I'm just quite a kind of curious, restless person. So I always think there's other interesting things out there that I would like to experience or be part of. So it was a combination of those reasons. But doing the masters, I think was or at least starting to do that was the thing that really like opened up. It's like, okay, there's a whole kind of category of research and knowledge and interest that I really do want to spend some sort of significant time with. So that was something that made me think, okay, right, this is going to be a great project, when I do come out of TikTok.
Yeah, so you're doing that, a couple of days a week? What else are you doing with your time at the moment?
I'm doing advisory work, non-exec work, a little bit of angel investing. So in and around the tech and media industries, mostly. So I actually really, really enjoying that, and finding that very fulfilling, working with companies at different stages, from really early stage startups to established scale ups, to also kind of blue chip media companies and other kind of corporations. So I like that. I like that variety. I like that combination. I find that actually working with companies at different stages and slightly different parts of the industry is really good and interesting for me. But I find there's a lot of benefit and kind of learnings you can draw one from the other, that I think can add quite a lot of value.
Yeah, your track record would say you know about picking winners, right?
I think you've got to be very humble about that, and thinking that you can always know would be a very bad strategy. But I think if you're really careful and thoughtful about some of the sort of structural factors in an industry, or in a category, and you have a strong point of view, a sort of well-informed point of view on, like, okay, where is that category or industry going? What are some of those trends? And if I'm right about those trends, and they continue over a sustained period for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where will that take you? What opportunities will that present? And so I think that's the way I like to think about these things. Is, okay, can I identify patterns? And if those patterns are right and they do continue, what kinds of things are going to change? And what kinds of things that we're seeing now, maybe at the fringes, are going to become very mainstream. And so I think that's just a way of trying to just put a bit of a framework around what are obviously often very fast moving. And the only thing I'd add to that is you've got to be humble, and you've got to be very ready to realize, okay, if I thought this was going to happen, it turns out it's not. You just have to acknowledge, okay, it's not panning out, and reset and reframe your kind of mental model of the category or how things are happening.
So what advice have we got there for the listeners? Well, clearly it's stay humble, stay curious, but look for companies where there is genuine difference and the ability to build out and sustain a large ecosystem.
Are you still developing separate marketing plans for each of your different channels to market? Can you really sanction messages reaching the same customers from unconnected targets? Listen, it's now the AI age. Things need to change. Positive is a different sort of AI-powered agency. From our very beginning, we've integrated marketing communications from PR to events, social to paid ads. Working smarter means working integrated. Let us show you what a truly joined-up strategy could do for your tech business. Contact Positive today with an email to hello@positivemarketing.com.
So while we're talking about the idea of if you want to dominate a category, you have to find something genuinely different and build a great ecosystem, there could actually be a cautionary tale that has actually occurred in the last few years, and certainly during the time that Rich has been developing his career. So just after Rich joined TikTok, Quibi was a short-form video streaming service designed for people to enjoy video content on their phones. And this launched in about 2020. It was led by a former Disney exec and veteran Hollywood executive, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and a former CEO of HP, Meg Whitman. The streaming service was at the time designed to be a revolutionary, in quotes, way to watch videos, in quotes, on the go, with shows and films specifically formatted to work on both landscape and portrait modes on your phone. Now, because of these big names, we think they managed to raise $2 billion from big investors like Alibaba, Walt Disney, Warner Media before it launched in April of 2020. There's also a long line of Hollywood talent was on board to provide the movies and the shows. And now Katzenberg and Whitman must have felt pretty good about their prospects. Yet, despite $2 billion in investment, Quibi was shut down after just 7 months. So, this was at a time, Rich, just after you joined TikTok, so you were in a good place to observe all this happening. So looking back, why do you think Quibi failed?
It is a really interesting case to consider. I mean, again, you have to sort of think back to 2020, as it was. Did they launch 2019 or 2020? I can't remember.
2020, April 2020.
2020, right, exactly. So I think that speaks to one of the big reasons, right? That was COVID. Timing. I mean, they were launching as a mobile first consumption app, and suddenly for people on the go. So for people, it was content on your mobiles when you didn't have your kind of TV to watch your streaming service, and suddenly everybody was at home and had could watch Netflix all day. So I mean that was it. You couldn't have been worse. And I think in one way it's sort of it's simple and such a big reason that you could just say that is the reason. That is the reason. But it's probably. And I think it was, almost impossible for them to overcome that. But it's probably interesting to consider whether they could have, what would have happened if COVID hadn't happened. And then I think you get into, you've got things like the emergence of TikTok and other kind of mobile first media, which was, and YouTube was growing incredibly fast in terms of mobile consumption at that point and doing incredibly well. So the question just becomes, is there a mismatch between that kind of Quibi, lean back, serialized, drama-oriented content approach and what people actually wanted or still want to consume on a mobile? And it feels to me like there is a mismatch. There's an element of interactivity, social, connections with other people. Those are all really, really important to the platforms that succeed on mobile.
Yeah, they were also pursuing a subscription model at the time when their e-commerce competitors were just giving it away for free. And perhaps that wasn't too attractive to people who were worried about where the next dollar was coming from during COVID.
Yeah, I think that's a factor. Although, YouTube was growing YouTube Premium at that point, and one of the selling points for YouTube Premium was you can take videos offline on your phone and watch them when you're commuting or when you're not on Wi-Fi or whatever. And, that wasn't the primary reason people subscribed to YouTube Premium, but it was definitely something people appreciated and liked. So, the subscription model, I think, can work. And, we're obviously seeing now increasingly, it's kind of working across more and more of the media landscape. So I don't think that in itself is a reason why it couldn't work.
Do you think there's an element of, because I subscribe to YouTube Premium, it's amazing. That's how you just get the most value out of the channel, in my view, or the platform. But do you think there's an element now that we've got so much content coming at us via mobiles, which of course we do carry everywhere, even to the loo? I'm afraid to say I hear people watching stuff in the loo. But do you think there's an element where there's a maximum amount of time? There's only so many hours in a day, right? And the attention economy's got us. Do you think they timed it possibly wrong, because you guys were flying at that point, both YouTube and TikTok, and it sort of filled up the hours that people have to devote, even though, there's 24 hours and people devote a lot. You're nearly done with how much time they've got left.
Yeah, I mean, the time people have spent on mobile and consuming video has continued to grow since 2020. So, theoretically, Quibi could have been part of that growth. So again, I don't think that consumption time on mobile was saturated at that point. So I think it's more about connecting the content experience to the form factor of a mobile and the sort of features that a mobile can enable in interactivity and connection. It for me would be more of a factor.
They saw YouTube as their competition when they should have actually seen TikTok as their competition, and they got caught between two categories and two really strong paradigmatic shifts.
I think that's right, because TikTok was very disruptive to YouTube and to other established players. So sort of everybody was caught slightly unawares, or at least surprised by the growth of TikTok, which was just phenomenal in that period.
I mean, my view, I guess, in summary on all this is that TikTok had already changed the game with short form video and the sort of content that would actually be consumed. And for us, that is the difference which defines a new category. And I think, in contrast, Quibi simply didn't get it and appeared to be launching what they thought was a better, because of the absolute enemy of category, version of Netflix and YouTube, and just too little, too late.
To the category definition, but I think it speaks to this point where you need to combine. In my view, you need to combine two things. You need to combine a really clear and strong view about macro long-term trends, and they had a view about mobile consumption, which was basically right, but you need to combine that macro long-term view with an incredible agility in the very short term to either see what's happening in the category around you and respond to that, or respond to the kind of feedback and usage behavior of your users. And so it's like, you've got to be very, very, agile in the short term, and very kind of, have a strong vision for the long term. And I think it's probably the short term piece that was a challenge here.
The next section we call 5-Minute Mentor, and this is really Rich's advice for founders and scalers of tech businesses. So we know, in an ever faster changing environment, it is a major challenge for anybody starting, scaling, or even leading an established business to figure out what's really going on and where to place their business bets. Rich, given you've spent your career so far working in a rapidly shifting environment that's redefined what we think of media, what advice would you give to anybody trying to navigate a path through and, crucially, take advantage of the rapidly shifting sands of tech?
Well, I think you've used that word rapidly shifting, or phrase, a couple of times, and the first thing for me is, when these things are shifting so rapidly, there's a new, content platforms emerging, new behaviors emerging, new technical capabilities. No, but there is a period where really nobody really knows, what's possible, what's happening, and we're in a period like that right now as well. And so the first thing I would say, and I've always thought about, is you have to learn by doing yourself. You have to give yourself direct exposure to whatever it is, the new content platform, the new kind of tools, you have to get hands-on with them so that you can sort of have an understanding of what they're capable of now. But just as importantly, I think that gives you an ability to sort of, if you keep doing that over time, could be a period of weeks or longer, months, it gives you an ability to see how the tools are starting to change or how the platform. So when you've got that first-hand experience, I think you really then need to sort of step back and think to yourself, okay, what is happening here? What kind of changes am I observing? And what happens if these changes keep happening? What if they keep compounding? And the kind of changes that I'm seeing, so emergence of creators as new kind of media companies, or all these kind of trends and changes. Obviously, we're seeing a lot with AI right now. What happens if they carry on? What sorts of things might be true in a year, or 3 years, or 5 years? And I think if you can do those two things, give yourself that sort of direct experience, but then step back and just have a few theories about what it might look like. I think that gives you an ability to sort of see, okay, well, if that's right, that these kinds of opportunities might exist in a few years. Or on a personal level, if that's right and these trends continue, I'm going to need to have certain skills and capabilities that I don't have now. And so I think it gives you a sort of pathway for personal development, but also for thinking about business and category evolution and opportunity.
That strikes me as a personal characteristic which they won't teach you in any MBA, and that's curiosity. You need to be curious. And so how is it that you fuel your curiosity to get to those decisions? And having had a look at what might be happening, how is it you start to think, okay, this is what we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, curiosity is probably to a certain extent a natural, characteristic, isn't it? So I'm definitely just a very curious person, interested, particularly in new things that haven't been seen before. And I'm interested in them because for me, they're the bridge to what's going to be happening in the future. So it gives you a little kind of window into what's coming down the line, which I think is really interesting and exciting. But I mean, more practically, I'm sort of semi-obsessive about reading and keeping up with what is happening in different areas of technology, what's happening in different areas of media or commerce or whatever areas I'm interested in. And I'm like probably many people, I'm absolutely stacked with newsletters, podcasts, books, and I'm constantly kind of refining and filtering the kind of things I'm reading to try and make sure I'm getting the best quality information on a regular basis, which is a sort of ongoing task.
Presumably that allows you to create a pretty strong point of view about things. And I guess once you've got that, did any of the experience you had at YouTube and Google make you think about, when you've decided how things are likely to change, what are the horizons you should be looking at in terms to have any form of planning around these shifting sands?
Definitely. I mean, I remember when I was at YouTube, one of the founders of Google used to talk about the fact that he thought you should have a quarterly plan, and you should have a sort of 3 to 5 year plan. And those should be the two things that you should really, really focus on. And obviously, you're updating your quarterly plan every quarter, and you might update your 3 to 5 year plan, every year, or maybe more frequently if things. But the point is, I think you've got to think, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow, next week, next month? What am I actually going to do, like in the very short term? And then what's the sort of broad direction that that's heading in? But if you anchor too much on the medium term, I think that's where you can get into trouble and sort of go towards a destination that actually, in the space of a year that you're aiming towards it might change quite significantly. But if you get the right longer term trends and directions, they're not going to change, and you're broad enough with them, they're not going to change that much. And you can keep course correcting over those quarterly cycles. So, I think it's now a pretty well established cadence of combining those two things in tech, and it obviously aligns to the the development cycles of software engineering and shipping products and this kind of thing. So I think the tech and product world has really led and been brilliant in helping think in that way. But I think a lot of people can apply those sorts of timeframes and that sort of thinking to what they're doing, even if they're not building building digital product.
Okay, so two strong pieces of advice there. Be curious and read a lot to figure out what's going on and what you can learn from the past, but also strong short-term planning, strong long-term planning, and course correct between the two as you move along.
You know what? This really grinds my gears.
Okay, so this is the part of the show where we ask our guests what's been annoying them in their work life, what has been grinding their gears. So, Rich, what's been grinding your gears recently?
Well, I don't know about necessarily specifically recently, but I mean, we've talked about the topic of curiosity a certain amount, and I have to say, over my career, I've consistently found it incredibly frustrating and annoying if people and when people are not curious and interested about what's changing, how things are developing, and thinking about how they can be adaptable towards that. It just seems to me to be a kind of it's a golden opportunity to sort of think ahead to how things are changing. Really interesting to sort of expose yourself to some of that and be curious about it. But it gives you a massive advantage to say, okay, if I have some understanding and a point of view about what's coming, it gives me a great opportunity. But I find it really frustrating when some people want to stick their heads in the sand and just think, okay, I'm either not curious about it or I don't really want to engage with the fact that things are changing. It's incredibly self-defeating.
But these days things are picking up. We were talking between ourselves about the speed at which AI is moving things, and love your short-term, long-term sort of cadence between planning. But how does one plan when you've got a new large language model every month and seemingly a new AI-powered gadget every week?
And you are right. It is so hard. I've really noticed it personally because I like to be hands-on with things and trying, as well as reading around how things are developing, but trying different tools, just getting a sense of them firsthand. Over the last 6 or 12 months, it's just been incredibly hard to do that with the pace of change, the number of new tools that are coming through. So I think it is, there's no doubt it's a challenge. But I also think just because it's a challenge doesn't mean you can't, make, certain moves in that direction. And you can filter it according to, actually, I'm just going to focus on, a couple of tools for the next, 2-3 months and just regularly, make sure I'm using them, see how they're developing, as well as reading around. So I think, look, for me, one of the massive skills that's needed today, and I'm sure going forward, is the ability to filter the massive amounts of information that are coming at us all. And so I think we all just have to build our own filters according to where we are in our life and career, and how much time we have to dedicate to these kinds of things. And it will look slightly different for everyone, but I think you do have to kind of take ownership of doing that, and make sure you are being curious and are looking forward in some way.
This whole issue of curiosity, and I mean, it has traditionally been assumed that in Europe, and this is a show for Europe, we can be, frankly, a little bit sniffy or snobby about new developments, and I think we touched on that earlier in this conversation, which is, when the idea of graters came along, the Americans in particular just grabbed it with both hands. Yet in Britain and in continental Europe and even in EMEA, it was seen as not very proper. I mean, how do we get over that issue?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Look, it's one of the great strengths of America, isn't it? Is the willingness to embrace the new and jump into that. And I think Europe is getting better, has sort of understood over the last 20 years or so of some of these big changes that actually there are opportunities. The key thing maybe is as businesses built around and on the internet, including in and around the creator economy, and as European versions of those continue to grow and sort of become mainstream, I think people in Europe realize that actually this is now fundamental. It's not a kind of new, thing that might be interesting, might not, and actually let's wait and see and let's prioritize our sort of legacy businesses. Increasingly, these digital and platform oriented businesses are fundamental to European tech and European business. So I think and hope that is encouraging Europe to really just be very proactive in saying, okay, we want to be leaders in those things. But there's no doubt it's to some extent just a cultural thing.
Well, let's hope we can evolve that. But in the meantime, we all need to focus on building our filters if we are to all move forward successfully. They always say that if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. And in Rich's case, you might not be surprised to know then that Rich gives his time to charity as a trustee of Teenage Cancer Trust. So, Rich, can you tell us a bit about Teenage Cancer Trust, how you got involved and what you and they get out of it?
Yeah, delighted to. So Teenage Cancer Trust was set up over 20 years ago now with the premise and the idea that actually teenagers and young people were kind of a little bit forgotten in terms of cancer care and provision. There's a lot of focus on young children, pediatric cancer care, a lot of focus on sort of older cohorts. But there was a group of teenagers and young people who weren't getting kind of age appropriate care. And if you are a 15, 16, 17-year-old, finding out that you have cancer, going through cancer treatment, actually, you don't want to be on the pediatric ward with really young kids. You don't really want to be on the adult ward. And so what Teenage Cancer Trust did is they built a series of over 20 dedicated age-appropriate wards in hospitals around the UK. And that is where teenagers and young people can receive their cancer care. They can connect with specially trained nurses and youth support coordinators. And it's just an amazing organization, advocates for young people, provides that clinical care. And so I was, very fortunate and delighted to get involved as a trustee 3 years ago, and help them in various different ways as they're continuing to build and develop. They have an amazing brand, but they're obviously continuing to try and build that brand, raise money, build awareness, which and I just think it's a fantastic cause and a great organisation.
So you're a trustee. It's a word people might be familiar with, but what does it actually mean, and what are your responsibilities? And I guess the question for different engine audiences, should other busy people in tech consider being a charity trustee on top of their existing workload? And also, is there really an upside in terms of what the experience of being a trustee would bring to your role in tech?
So, being a trustee, for anyone who's not familiar, basically means you're a non-executive board member. So, in the charity world, it's called being a trustee, but essentially it's a non-exec. And so you primarily attend board meetings on a regular basis. You may be part of, the subcommittees, helping to manage and guide the strategy of the charity, manage governance around the charity. So it's a really, really important role in terms of, as I say, supporting that overall strategy, the governance, working with other board members and with the CEO and the senior executive team in the charity to review strategies, think about opportunities or challenges, provide essentially the classic role for a trustee is to provide support and challenge. So you are there to support, add ideas, contributions, connections in some case if you can, and to challenge, to ask questions, to just make sure that the right different considerations. And so just like any other board, Teenage Cancer Trust board is made up of a group with varying backgrounds and expertise and expertise. And so, I try and bring, my understanding in particular and knowledge of digital platforms, as one area which is very, very relevant to Teenage Cancer Trust. And so that's an example of where I where I get involved and ask questions and try and provide support.
So that's a really rewarding experience that can expand your skill set as well as you bringing stuff to that party. So if anybody listening wants to get involved with Teenage Cancer Trust, how can they make that happen?
You can obviously, find out lots of information about the charity on their website. So definitely encourage that. Teenage Cancer Trust has a lot of corporate supporters, has a corporate advisory board. So always looking for people who might be interested to help in those kinds of ways. You can get involved directly yourself. You can raise money for the charity. The London Marathon's coming up. There'll be, thousands of people running for Teenage Cancer Trust. Teenage Cancer Trust has just launched, if I can plug, they've just launched an online shop, which is selling exclusive prints and merchandise from over 20 years of Teenage Cancer Trust gigs and association with the music industry. So amazing, signed gig posters, completely one-off. So if you're a music fan, definitely, check out Teenage Cancer Trust online shop. And so there's lots of ways from the individual to the kind of corporate level of getting involved. And I definitely recommend it.
I guess in summary then, don't forget that charities are also categories, so there's a lot to be learned there. Being involved will spread your knowledge and potentially feed your curiosity. And if you're interested in Teenage Cancer Trust and a bit of a music fan, head very, very quickly over to the Teenage Cancer Trust site and grab yourself some music memorabilia.
Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about category design, head to becategorical.com. If you need help designing and dominating your category, then get in touch. Contact details are in the show notes.